This is IBM Museum, and I'm here through all the technical difficulties, finally able to do a recording tonight. But I don't want to even sneeze around this video recording box. But I'm responding on this video to a viewer comment from a video long ago, probably about a year ago, of working with the zip drives, iOmega zip drives. And so I'm going to go through and give a little bit more of rundown of the zip drives and just show the connection, show what the comment was. So I'm going to get turned around and get on screen. I've been notified as well that when I talk, it's a little bit out of sync for all the recording process. There's a delay, there's a loss of synchronization. So I'll try and keep my mouth out of the frame of view so that just won't go through and disturb things. I think I can kind of work with that. So as you see on the bench here, I do have a zip drive. I'm going through to where I have a ThinkPad T40, and I've got a switch box actually doing the interconnection cables from also a Lenovo Vista system that's to this screen back behind at the back of the bench. And so I'll go over the connections. And what the question was is this cable here. I was asked for what the pinout is. And rather than go through and disturb and possibly upset things, I'm just going to go through from here to show another example of the cable. And in particular, it is the auto detect cable. And it's got the iOmega symbol on one end. And, even it's got the embossed lettering and icon on both sides of the connector. And it is the 25-pin connectors. But I was asked what the pinout of this is because someone was not able to locate a cable. And as I went through with a continuity checker, I found out it's wired all 25 pins straight through to the other side. And so this works with the zip drive that is both the SCSI and parallel port model. And I'll pull that out as well. I've got all these examples at my feet. Let me quickly go through and try and get down to the model that I'm referring to. And there's that auto detect, and it shows the SCSI symbol as well as the printer. It just has the one switch on there that goes between SCSI ID 5 or 6. If you're using the SCSI connection, there's no other ID setting other than 5 or 6 for this unit. And so there it's a 100 megabyte zip disk is what it uses. And this is the plus model that does the parallel and SCSI. So this connection goes in from, of course, the auto detect side, goes into the auto detect plug in this case. Now, I'm going to go through all the other types, that preceded the plus drive and cable, just to kind of show some of the models that look very similar, but so people are aware of what those are. I'm going to go through and let's bring up the old non-plus parallel port model. Now you notice this cable, it's gray, has the difference of the blue end for this side, and it's not marked. Of course, the cable's clearly not marked as auto detect or anything else. It's marked as zip, and it's blue in color along with the embossed lettering to let you know what side to connect up. Now, I use this drive actually quite a bit because I use it with my Model 30 system that's normally based on an Intel 8086 CPU, and I've got an NEC V30 that's in there to run that system. But I have to use the Palm Zip driver, and the Palm to support a system with that older CPU. The iOmega software does not go through and support a system that far back where you have a parallel port. And of course, you can also use that with a PC or XT, where you use the Palm Zip driver. Of course, searching for that, I can also include the link in the description for that. I have that installed on my Model 30, so I can go through and use this drive. Now, I have to go through and use the parallel port model because the Palm Zip driver does not support that auto detect drive, even when it's in the parallel port configuration. You have to go through and use a parallel port only model, and I can go through and confirm that. But as far as I know, you've got to use this parallel port model with the Palm Zip. Now, on the other side, now I'm going to be careful not to kind of obscure all the stuff at my feet as I go through and work with it. Now, this is the SCSI version, and you have a few more other settings. Just the still the SCSI ID of 5 and 6, but with a true SCSI, you have to worry about termination. Now, the auto detect or the plus unit goes through and terminates automatically if it's SCSI, but you have a chance to go through to either turn the termination on, which if this is at the end of that cable, you're going to turn termination on. You're only going to turn termination off if you're going through and daisy chaining, because you're coming in the cable in here and going to daisy chain any additional SCSI devices from this port. Now, I've heard that the plus unit doesn't really do daisy chaining on the SCSI bus very well. Now, on the parallel port model, you can do the same sort of daisy chaining you can do as it shows a printer off of that. So you have your zip drive first connected to the parallel port of the system, and you're going through to daisy chain your printer off of the parallel port on the zip drive. Now, for the SCSI model, you say, well, how does this connect into a system? And what I do, this 25 pin SCSI port is considered, it's known as the Apple SCSI. Just as we have a little short lead here that goes through, has the Apple, and it just, I guess, some sort of Apple identification. But this would go through to where, for instance, of daisy chaining something further, another SCSI device, the Centronics 50-pin Centronics was very common with how most SCSI devices had. The external connector for 50 pin was very common, and even on Apple devices. So this was on the host computer side. So if you, in fact, if you were going through and daisy chaining more devices to the SCSI connection, you would go through and have this going to further SCSI devices. And by the same token, on the SCSI side, you could go through and have a straight through 25 pin connector from the host system to this for effectively for that Apple SCSI connector. If you did have were in need of a cable, I'll go through and show what this sort of angle can do as well. I thought it really interesting too for as I was going through and setting up my cables, I found this as well. And we talk about the embossed lettering and things like that on it, that this has embossed for the iOmega, just like the zip drive itself, the manufacturer of the zip drive. This is probably for an older Bernelli box, either from an Apple system or one that uses that Apple SCSI port, the 25 pin connector. And I'll show an adapter with that as I go through and show my SCSI side of things as well. So most of my, whenever I talk about zip drives, or anybody talks about zip drives for that matter, they always talk about the click of death. And that is where there is a trouble with where the drive just goes through and click, 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 click when you have a disk inserted. And you don't want to go through and use that disk in another zip drive, because the actual error stem, it can make the other drive have problems with the heads. It's actually a head problem. And as I've talked zip drives in the past, I've talked about the Steve Gibson file that's even still up at Gibson Research, which is grc.com. And there's a Trouble in Paradise utility that can be run. Steve goes through and gives a very good write-up as far as what actually happens with the click of death. And there's a video. I saw a Security Now episode that they talked about the Trouble in Paradise. You can go through and search on YouTube, and I can try and link that in the comments as well, or link it in the video description, because that's a very good rundown of these as well. Now, it's worthwhile saying that for that so-called click of death, I only have 2 drives that are non-functional for me. Out of all, I probably have a dozen of these drives around, mostly in the SCSI configure setup. In other words, just like this, that are perfectly functional. But I do have 2 that I picked up recently and picked these up for free. They typically are not too bad. People get a little bit gun shy of whether they'll have a drive, and as I go through and I tag things and I put a question mark, because I still mean to retest these a little bit more. Now, this is just like I had in my hands a moment ago. That's why I don't want to get these mixed up at my feet. This is a SCSI drive, and this one sounds fine. There's one of them that I was hearing the spindle, an actual mechanical issue. And certainly if I had a click of death, I would not want to go through, and I may go through just on some of my junk disk as I have, just to see if it will load or run or whatever. Now, for visual differences, And you notice that this is a SCSI connection on the back. It's the SCSI version. Here's another version that looks very similar, but it's rounded off a little bit more. And this is also the SCSI version. Now, the difference is that this is a Zip 250. I've got all sorts of stuff. These things are a little bit dirty, dusty, cobwebs hanging off them, but this is a 250. And all my 250 megabyte drives I have that are working are actually internal, and then also the USB version that came out had an adapter as well. But these are the only two drives I have that went through and tested bad, and they're both a SCSI version. Now, the click of death was supposed to be happening on the older Zip 100 drives, and it seemed to be certain batches. It seemed to be before the plus drives and things like that. I really don't have an overall numbers as far as what drives were affected. Now, it's a little bit of prophecy fallacy that I'm saying when I say all of my other drives work. I have not experienced. I don't know necessarily that the reason that these two don't work is for that necessarily that click of death. But I've picked up my zip drives later on after all the bad ones have likely been cycled out of the system. In other words, a drive that's still around and operational has largely it's come through that click of death period, as it were, or if it has enough working internals. And that Steve Gibson utility I'm talking about of Trouble in Paradise has the ability to run on the system to test a drive whether it is susceptible to the click of death or not. So that is I'll go through probably in a video to go through and demonstrate it. As you notice, the power button is also different for that Zip 250, and this is able to read the 100 megabyte disk just the same, and then also there's 250 megabyte disk that are in the same appearance and style that, of course, they're marked as the 250s. And these can be formatted for both PC and the Macintosh side, being that we're talking about the Apple SCSI versions. Now, on my, and this is a Zip Plus that I have here, just like I was showing in my hand a moment ago. And I've got the ThinkPad T40 connected through the parallel port side of things. So I have this 25 pin cable, and it's a wider cable for the 25 wires in that within that insulation that you definitely want to use a continuity meter if you're using something like this to going from the system to the zip drive, either for the parallel SCSI or going to the switch box. I'll show you what that element is here in just a moment as well. You don't want, as very far off screen here, you can see how thin this cable is comparably, even from the distance there, just as I'm trying to bring it right in frame. And it's a 25 pin connector on both ends. Typically what those were, this has the same diameter of cable on it. Typically what this was is the serial connection, which is originally 25 pins on like the PC and XT, as well as many other systems, terminals, things like that, wasn't using all the 25 pins. And so they had an adaptation to the DB9 later on that came out with the IBM AT, and this became a little bit more common or synonymous for a serial port connection later on. Now, on the system, it was a male had male pins. This is the female mating side that would connect to that. Typically on the system, you would see it on an older system, you'd see it like this on the PC and XT or compatibles or on terminals or whatever. This would be on the host side. And this cable by the gender on each end, I can tell that this was going through to plug into the 9-pin serial port on the system to take it to a modem connection at the other end. And just the wires that were needed for that serial connection are in there. This is this thin of cable, whereas comparably those cables going to my switch box are wider. Just to demonstrate, this is 25 pins wired straight through. And in this case, it's, it's male on both ends. I would have to go through something like a switch box to show those. But having the thicker cable, but you still want to go through with the continuity meter or some making sure that those are all 25 pins are wired straight through to use it in a situation like this. Now, on the, I have other T40 class systems here, just to kind of show that's the parallel port. And that's what I have connected for this ThinkPad T40 here. On the back, it doesn't even have a serial port connection on the system, but it does have the parallel port there. So I thought, hey, that's nice to take advantage of that. And that's just a regular battery. This is the extended battery or the bigger battery, same sorts of systems. And this system, it'll come up into the discussion a little bit later on. It's got the iFixit logo on there. It's got a cool thing. I'll probably do another video on it for all that. And I think I picked this up for free. It wasn't, well, it is a Goodwill-based system. But it has, and it's not really very evident. Well, I guess I can get it barely on screen. That's very faded, but $9.99. I don't think that was the price. I think I picked this up for free. I didn't necessarily get direct from Goodwill, but this is through a Goodwill system, and this will come into the discussion a little bit later on. So I'm using, at the other end, I have this ThinkCenter system with Windows Vista. Both are in screensaver systems now. And I have this adapter in there for the SCSI side. And this is an excellent adapter for that. It's got that 25-pin so-called Apple SCSI out. And it does not have the internal connection. It's got the little terminating resistors there to terminate that down manually. So this is a nice little thing. And this was a full-sized or could be in a full-size PCI slot. I went through for these ThinkCenter systems take a low profile card like this. And this is just perfect for being a low profile in a low profile system on a PCI slot. And providing that external SCSI port to run something like a zip drive. Now I actually have, and you'll see the label on the front. This is labeled as Windows Vista 32-bit because I have a twin system that I have the Vista 64-bit installed. And that's early on in the 64-bit operating system. I mean, Windows XP has 64-bit version, and that had less service pack updates. Vista also had a 64-bit. That was when the 64-bit was starting to come in a little bit more into effect. But what you'll hear is stories about 64-bit support under XP and Vista for adapters. And this Adaptec SCSI board goes through and it works perfectly on my 32-bit system. Putting this in a 64-bit system of Vista, it doesn't have drivers. And now Adaptec is called MicroSemi, going through, and they have all kinds of 32-bit, even up to later versions of Windows 7 and Windows 10. They do have the 32-bit drivers, but they don't have a 64-bit driver. I've heard of on a forum of one little patch that could be done, just as the software that supports this particular chip, and going through and editing that software to get a working, this working under a 64-bit OS like XP or Vista. But I can't find that now. The forum that it was actually on is dead, and I just can't find the driver that they're referring to that had to be modified, or the instructions how to modify it. Now, I have the lid open for that reason. I don't think it's affecting the cooling all that much, just to show the inside of the low profile. That is right on the outer slot of that and just fits in there very good. Having the 25-pin connector on the back is a little bit tight, but I do have that. So that's the SCSI side. So as you understand it, I have, going to the switch box, I have parallel port over a 25-pin connector, and also 25 pins coming off the SCSI adapter, coming over to the same switch box. Then from there, going to the common output of that auto detect, or that zip drive plus, that's supposed to work on parallel and SCSI. Now, at the moment, I actually have this over, and this is effectively my A system, and the Windows Vista is my B system on the switch box. It's just a 3-connection switch box. A little bit of the reverse of this one. You know, look at this. I picked up at a garage sale for $5 years ago, not anything recent. But and Belkin, that is a name to that we see more commonly now. It's funny that they show a little cable going around and connecting in of their little logo and what the model number of that box is, from Belkin Components. But it's got the common and then your A and your B side. And just the same as there, if I were to have a cable going to, from the switch box to that source, I could go through and connect this into the parallel port or that SCSI adapter, as I'm showing, for the cable. And again, this cable is 25 pins straight through. So I'm showing how this switch box is is set up in my system here. I'm able to go through and switch between each effective system. Now, also, for the SCSI side, I was even doing something to where, this would even mate to a switch box like this. For the SCSI connection, I was going through and using a box like this, because going through on different systems with SCSI for sharing a SCSI version of the zip drive or that plus drive in SCSI mode, you can use a cable like that. A cable even like that I-Omega that I was showing, and that this being the more common SCSI connection. Now, it's interesting for all that if I went through to make sure I have my latch hold of my SCSI cables. If I were even to go through and do something like this to where I had my A and my B side going to 25 pins, the 25 pin connectors, like that, this switch box would still work with even the parallel port version of the zip drive, because as it is, the switch box is just going through and switching between the inputs, and whatever change in wiring for this connector is also just reversed with the other side of the connector as well. So I would think that the 25 pin switch boxes are probably easier to find and less costly than a SCSI switch box, but I'm just showing these switch boxes. They were in a lot of different forms. The 25 pin was the most common, as it is even on the side here. I have a multi connection switch box as well for the client access of the AS400 that's below it, that I could go through and switch all sorts of different inputs or have different systems with that serial connection going through and receiving output from the AS400 as it goes through and boots up, or to go through and configure it. Now, they do make, this is very similar, where that's a 4 input ports switch box I have over here. It's got the A, B, C, and D, just like that. This is global. This is another brand that's out there in the computer world too. But then your common being in the center and all around. I mean, if you even had more systems to kind of juggle than this. So as it is, I'm not going through and switching this during operation. Each of the systems to go through and detect it, this would have to be over to the A position when the ThinkPad boots to detect the zip drive being connected onto the parallel port. And as it shows, I know in this, I'm not really going through and touching, and I could go through and give VGA input to show this a little bit more. But just to describe it, you'll have to believe me for the listing. This has I-Omega Zip 100 as the E drive removable disk on this system. And going through with it switched over in the A position, if I insert the disk, it should go through and detect that on the ThinkPad, and it should bring up the window. As you see the hour, it's hard to see the hourglass and everything else, but brought up the contents, since that's effectively a removable drive as it went through. And conversely, when this is ejected, that window would close. That may be set on some systems or not, depending. But for this, that's the way that this system's set up. And this is actually Windows XP Professional that's on this side running on the ThinkPad. Now, as I get into that T42 that I had that had the iFixit logo, I want to do a separate video just based on this actually, and it's a really cool startup logo on this system, but this is actually CentOS 6.6 that's on here. It's not Windows. I want to go through and connect up that zip drive to the parallel port and see what CentOS recognizes for that zip drive. It should recognize that just as a removable drive the same way. I don't know who stuck that iFixit logo on there, but the boot up screen for this also has that logo along with the IBM screensaver, as we saw on here earlier. And I'm just interested in seeing how that goes. Now, on my other system, ThinkPad, not to see if this is another T40. No, this is another T42. And I have these sheets, of course, on my, just as you see down here as well, telling me that basically where I go through and write down the specs. And for the T42, it's that. And I say need multiple updates to drivers because I had to go through and reinstall the XP Professional on this. And the main thing is the you get the network driver and you can get on the internet for location, and particularly with these old ThinkPads. There's thinkpads.com or .org, I think, that goes through and has the drivers. Now, the other thing for connecting up the zip drive is I would be able to get the drivers online with the system through like Vista or even the later system and put them on a zip drive and then go through to transfer them over to this system to load them on through the zip drive. And because that parallel port connection is recognized even when the other things like the network connection and other things can fail for loading those. Since they don't have the drivers, you're not able to get online with the network connection. So those will be some future video material to go through and look at. Now, I'm not going through with the drive contents open, and we don't want to go through and have corruption of the disk or anything like that. But which could occur of going through and switching these systems over live. I mean, you do that at your own risk. But this is just effectively the switch box. It's just like you're disconnecting the cable away from it. We're going to go through and we're going to actually eject the disk here first. I'm going to switch it to B for the Vista system. And we're going to look. And I saw, I went through and actually restarted the system from how I had it set up initially because I saw a behavior of it. And we're going to go into the computer. And so as the system started up, and I know, as I said, it's really, really hard to see, but this is labeled as removable disk E and not with the necessarily identification like it has here on XP of iOmega Zip 100 for that parallel port connection. But what happens, and I think this system, when I put the disk in, I don't think it brings up any of the window for removable drive. It's just not set that way, I don't think. But we'll put the disk in, and we are able to go through and check the contents. And once we go back to the computer listing again, it now lists that as zip-100, of course, is the same drive letter, the E drive letter. And that's just acquiring that this has a CD-ROM drive on it that's D, the hard drive as the C, the hard drive that's back in the carriage here. And so there's no diskette drive or anything like that. This is external USB diskette drives would be one possibility, just like I have for the ThinkPad, that I have this, I even have the little carrier, that this is the USB diskette drive for this level of ThinkPad because it has even PCMCIA slots. It doesn't seem like it has the cover for it. It's got an optical drive. This is actually DVD and CD-RW, right? But it doesn't have a diskette drive, as you'll notice. And so it, using the USB connections, able to use that diskette drive off to the side. So, but that's just the drive organization. On the going through back over to the ThinkPad that's gone over to the screensaver, it recognizes that I have the diskette drive plugged into the USB for A, the hard drive is C, the DVD CD-RW is the D drive, the iOmega is the E drive on here as well. And what I'm saying is just that zip drive is going to be in the order of how the drivers are loaded. Typically in this instance, both for parallel port and SCSI, as we see, it's loaded after the CD driver. So it has a drive letter like E, whereas the CD or DVD drive has the D letter. So I think that's a real good overrun, although probably waded through a lot of stuff. Just a good overview of how that zip drive even generated from, what that cable, how that cable was wired. But, it was, I think, a very complete video otherwise. So I'm going to go through, get turned back around. I've been rather surprised that everything behaved on me for the length of this video. And trying to see the timeline. Wow, that's getting pretty long. But good overview. Make your comments and everything else, your support of me going through technical difficulties or whatever. But I was glad to go through and just answer a simple comment on one of my videos of a long time ago of what that cable, that the wiring would be for that auto detect cable. And same as the older parallel port cable, you could actually swap those interchangeably if you're able to find that male to female or different genders on both ends of that 25-pin cable that's wired straight through. You want to do a continuity check of the pins to go through and just get a configuration to where you can do where it gives the sound as you go through and test your probes. And maybe the noise canceling headset or something else is doing. I can't hear the tones for all that. These noise canceling headsets are excellent for all that, drowning out the other noise and everything. But that's the pinout of that cable. So answered a nice simple question with a big long video, but well, what the heck. So the too long didn't read is that straight through cable. But stay tuned for other videos as I'll go through and do those other ThinkPads, and hopefully my recording gear will work. I just went through so much issues of trying to get it to before I could get a video recorded tonight. But that's all I have for now. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.